Meanwhile, back in Willow Creek, Karen didn't discover the situation until later that evening. The HOA meeting had wrapped up, and she strutted out to retrieve her SUV, expecting to drive off without a hitch. When she reached the workshop and tried to open the side door, it wouldn't budge. She tugged harder, thinking it was stuck, but it was like pulling on a brick wall. Frowning, she moved to the roll-up door and yanked on the handle. Nothing. She peered through the small window in the side door and saw her SUV sitting there, untouched, but the realization hit her: the doors were sealed. Karen's first instinct was to call Dave, but his phone went straight to voicemail. She sent a flurry of texts, each one more frantic than the last. "This isn't funny, Dave. You can't do this. I'll have you fined for this." When she got no response, she called the HOA board members, ranting about Dave's vandalism. They were sympathetic but unsure what to do. After all, the car was on his property, and he hadn't technically damaged it. One board member suggested calling a locksmith, but a quick inspection revealed that no locksmith could open those doors without heavy-duty tools. By the next morning, Karen was livid. She called the local police, demanding they arrest Dave for theft or vandalism or whatever charge she could think of. The officer who responded, a seasoned cop named Officer Martinez, listened patiently as Karen gestured wildly at the workshop. He walked around the building, noting the welds, and asked Karen why her car was in Dave's workshop in the first place. "It's a community space," she insisted. "He wasn't using it, and I needed a spot for the HOA meeting." Martinez raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, this is private property. Did you have permission to park here?" Karen sputtered, her face turning red. "I'm the HOA president. I don't need permission." The officer sighed, jotting something in his notebook. "Well, it sounds like a civil matter. You'll need to take it up with him when he's back. In the meantime, I suggest you find another way to get around." Karen was beside herself. She relied on her SUV for everything: errands, HOA inspections, even her side gig as a real estate agent. Without it, she was stranded. She called a tow company, hoping they could break into the workshop, but they took one look at the welds and shook their heads. "You'd need a cutting torch or an angle grinder," the tow driver said. "And even then, it's gonna take time. Plus, it's not our property to mess with." As the days passed, Karen's frustration grew. She borrowed her husband's old sedan, but it wasn't the same. The SUV was her status symbol, her pride and joy, and being without it stung. She posted about the situation on the neighborhood's online forum, painting herself as the victim of Dave's unhinged behavior. Some neighbors sympathized, but others, who'd been on the receiving end of Karen's HOA tyranny, quietly cheered Dave on. One neighbor even commented, "Maybe next time you'll ask before parking in someone's workshop." Dave, meanwhile, was enjoying his time at the cabin. He spent his days fishing, grilling steaks with his brother, and working on a small metal sculpture he'd been meaning to finish. The peace and quiet were a stark contrast to the chaos he knew he'd left behind. He didn't check his phone, didn't look at emails, and didn't think about Karen or her SUV. For the first time in months, he felt truly relaxed. Back in Willow Creek, Karen's attempts to resolve the situation hit one roadblock after another. She contacted a contractor who specialized in metalwork, but he quoted her a price that made her blanch: several $100s just to cut through the welds, plus potential legal issues since it was Dave's property. She considered hiring a lawyer, but the cost and time involved deterred her. The HOA board, tired of her constant complaints, began to distance themselves, leaving her to deal with the mess alone. By day 5, Karen's anger had turned to desperation. She'd missed several real estate appointments because of her limited transportation, and her husband was growing annoyed at having to share his car. She started knocking on neighbors' doors, asking if anyone had heard from Dave or knew where he was. Most just shrugged, unwilling to get involved. One neighbor, a retired mechanic named Tom, couldn't resist a jab. "You know, Karen, maybe if you hadn't parked in his workshop, none of this would have happened." On the 7th day, Dave returned home. He pulled into his driveway, noticing a small crowd of neighbors lingering near his workshop. Karen was there, arms crossed, her face a mix of fury and exhaustion. Officer Martinez was there too, leaning against his patrol car, looking amused. Dave got out of his truck, bag slung over his shoulder, and walked toward the workshop without acknowledging anyone. "Dave!" Karen shouted, storming toward him. You think this is a game? Open my car door right now, or I'll sue you. Dave turned to her, his expression calm. Karen, you parked in my workshop without permission. I told you to move it, and you didn't. I needed to make sure my property was secure while I was gone. Secure? She screeched. You welded the doors shut. That's vandalism. Officer Martinez stepped forward. Ma'am, we've been over this. It's his property. He's within his rights to secure it. You shouldn't have parked there. Dave pulled out his angle grinder from the back of his truck. I'll open it up now, he said, addressing the officer. But I want it noted that she trespassed and ignored my request to move her vehicle. Martinez nodded, jotting in his notebook again. Dave set to work, the grinder's high-pitched whine cutting through the morning air. Sparks flew as he sliced through the welds on the side door, then the roll-up door. It took about 30 minutes, but soon the doors were free. Karen rushed to her SUV, checking it for damage. It was untouched, exactly as she'd left it. She turned to Dave, still fuming. This isn't over. You'll hear from my lawyer. Dave shrugged. Send me the bill for your inconvenience, Karen. But next time, don't park in my workshop. The crowd dispersed, some neighbors chuckling under their breath. Officer Martinez gave Dave a nod before driving off. Karen peeled out of the workshop, her SUV's tires squealing as she sped down the street. Dave watched her go, then rolled the workshop door shut and locked it properly this time. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood buzzed with the story. Karen's influence in the HOA waned as more residents grew tired of her overreach. She never followed through on her threat to sue, likely realizing she had no case. Dave, meanwhile, went back to his routine, spending evenings in his workshop, the hum of his welder a reminder of the lesson he'd taught. He didn't hear from Karen again, but he made sure to install a heavy-duty lock on his workshop door, just in case. The incident became a local legend, a tale of one man standing up to the HOA's reign of petty tyranny. Dave didn't see himself as a hero. He was just a guy who wanted his space respected. But for the neighbors who'd endured Karen's wrath, he was the guy who'd finally put her in her place, without saying a word, just a few well-placed welds and a week-long vacation. When Dave came home to find a shiny red SUV parked smack in the middle of his workshop, he didn't expect it to belong to Karen, the HOA's self-appointed enforcer. But when he realized she'd not only trespassed but also refused to move her car, he decided to teach her a lesson she'd never forget, by welding the workshop doors shut and disappearing for a week, leaving her vehicle trapped in his domain. Dave had lived in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek for nearly a decade. His modest two-story home sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, with a detached garage he'd converted into a workshop for his welding and metalwork projects. It was his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the monotony of his day job as a mechanic and lose himself in the sparks and steel. The workshop was his pride and joy, filled with tools he'd collected over years, a custom workbench, and a meticulously organized space for his craft. He wasn't one for drama, but the neighborhood's homeowners association, HOA, had been a thorn in his side since the day he moved in. The HOA, led by a woman named Karen Whitaker, was notorious for its overzealous enforcement of rules. Karen, a middle-aged woman with a penchant for bright lipstick and an even brighter sense of entitlement, patrolled the neighborhood like a hawk. She'd leave notes on cars parked an inch over the line, measure lawns to ensure they were cut to regulation length, and once find a family for having a basketball hoop 2 feet too close to the street. Dave had clashed with her before, over his mailbox being non-compliant in color or his workshop's exterior paint being too industrial. He'd always complied, albeit grudgingly, to avoid escalation. But this time, Karen had crossed a line that Dave wasn't willing to ignore. It was a Thursday afternoon in late June when Dave pulled into his driveway after a long shift at the auto shop. He noticed the unfamiliar red SUV parked not in his driveway, but inside his workshop. The roll-up door was open, and the vehicle was positioned right in the center, blocking his workbench and tools. At first, he thought it was a mistake. Maybe a delivery driver had gotten confused or a neighbor had parked there by accident. He checked the license plate, hoping to recognize it, but it didn't belong to anyone he knew. The car was pristine, with a custom vanity plate that read, Karen Boss. Dave's stomach sank. He knew exactly who this belonged to. He walked around the SUV, inspecting the scene. The workshop door had been left ajar, and there were no signs of forced entry. Karen must have opened it herself, assuming she had the right to use his property as her personal parking lot. Dave's blood boiled. This wasn't just a violation of his space, it was a blatant display of the entitlement he'd come to expect from her. He grabbed his phone and dialed her number, which he'd saved from the last HOA meeting where she'd lectured him about his unapproved workshop signage. "Karen, this is Dave," he said when she picked up, keeping his tone calm but firm. "Why is your car in my workshop?" "Oh, Dave," she replied, her voice dripping with condescension. "I needed a spot to park for the HOA meeting tonight. Your garage was open, and it's not like you're using it right now. I'll move it later." Dave clenched his jaw. "It's not a garage, Karen. It's my workshop. And you didn't ask. You need to move it now." Karen laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "I'm in the middle of something. It's just for a few hours. Don't make a big deal out of it. You know, you really should be more cooperative with the HOA. We're all in this together." "Karen, I'm not asking. Move your car, or I will." "Don't you dare touch my vehicle, Dave," she snapped. "I'm the HOA president. You don't want to mess with me. I'll have it out by tonight." The call ended, and Dave stood in his workshop, staring at the SUV. He wasn't one to act impulsively, but something about her tone, the way she assumed she could do whatever she wanted, lit a fuse in him. He'd had enough of her power trips. He wasn't going to let her walk all over him this time. An idea formed in his mind, one that was equal parts petty and satisfying. He glanced at his welding equipment, neatly arranged on the far wall, and a slow grin spread across his face. Dave had been welding since he was a teenager, learning the trade from his father, who'd been a welder for 30 years. He knew how to handle a torch, and he knew how to make things stick. The workshop had two entrances, the large roll-up door and a smaller side door. Both were metal, sturdy, and perfect for what he had in mind. He grabbed his welding helmet, gloves, and torch, and got to work. He started with the side door, running a bead of weld along the seam where the door met the frame. The metal glowed red-hot as he worked, the sparks flying in a controlled dance. It took him about 20 minutes to seal the side door completely, ensuring it couldn't be opened without serious effort. Then he moved to the roll-up door. This one was trickier. It was designed to slide up and down, so he focused on the tracks, welding them in place so the door wouldn't budge. He didn't weld the entire length, just enough to make it impossible to open without cutting through the metal. The SUV was now effectively trapped inside. When he was done, Dave stepped back and admired his work. The welds were clean, strong, and nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. Karen's car wasn't going anywhere. But Dave wasn't finished. He wanted to make sure she felt the consequences of her actions. He grabbed his phone and sent her a text. "Since you're so comfortable parking in my workshop, I've decided to take a little vacation. Good luck getting your car out. I'll be back in a week." With that, Dave packed a bag, locked up his house, and drove to his brother's cabin about 3 hours away. He'd been meaning to visit for a while, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity. The cabin was remote, with spotty cell service, which suited him just fine. He wanted Karen to stew, to realize she couldn't just bulldoze her way into his life without repercussions. He turned off his phone, tossed it into his glove compartment, and hit the road.